Joy's Way, a map for the Transformational Journey by Dr. Brugh Joy. Chapter 2, Teachers, Psi Phenomena, and the Hologram Analogy. And then there's a subtitle and it says, some teachers are hallways, some teachers are staircases. To have breadth and depth in your expanding awareness, find both kinds. In my current work, I repeatedly emphasize that there is but one basic teacher, life itself. Life is the great teacher. As we enter adulthood in the normal pattern, we encounter many varieties of specialized teachers. Example, mother and father, brothers, sisters, playmates, the professional teachers we encounter in established educational systems, both public and private, and our marital partners. But I want to extend the concept of the teacher to include every human experience. What a specific human teacher teaches us may or may not be true, but all of life's experiences are intrinsically valid. It's only in our interpretation of them that there can be potential error. Generally, in our cultural heritage and more formally in our educational systems, we are trained or conditioned to conceive of teachers as being outside ourselves. Any new information to be valid must either come from an individual or a consensus representing authority in a particular area, or must be logically deduced from controlled research based on the scientific method. Any information from any other source is open to question and subject to some degree of invalidation. This sanction is so strong as to cause most people in the West to declare as improbable or even impossible certain experiences that, to a growing but still small number of people in the West, are real and normal. Although most other Western people would deny them, they happen. They do not represent authorities, intellectual or otherwise. They are not derived from experiments or the scientific method. They are not external. They are internal teachers from experience, from life itself. I speak of the West in this connection because in many other cultures in the world today, people experience life in reality in a different manner, and it is all entirely normal to them. For those people, it would be difficult to understand how Western science can deny such basic life experiences as telepathy, in brackets, transmitting and or receiving through impresses from other conscious life forms. Precognition, in brackets, perceiving the future. Past cognition, in brackets, seeing in the present events that occurred in the past. Psychokinesis, in brackets, moving or influencing objects through the power of thought alone. Clairvoyant perception, in brackets, seeing events at a distance, even including visions of auric fields and chakras of human beings and animals. Clairaudience, in brackets, hearing sounds or voices at a distance in the past or the future. Clairsentience, in brackets, feeling other beings' emotional responses and or pains and or other bodily senses. And materialization and dematerialization, in brackets, making objects seem to appear or disappear either in one's presence or at a distance. While Western science rejects these phenomena called Psi phenomena, PSI phenomena, my personal experience with them has been too extensive and too deep for me to do anything but accept them. In addition, many individuals with excellent credentials discuss aspects of mind over matter phenomena in published reports and public lectures. Such men and women as Paul Brenner, David Bresler, Barbara Brown, Elmer and Alice Green, Valerie Hunt, Shafika Karugula, Stanley Krippner, Lawrence Lashan, John C. Lilly, Evarts Loomis, Jacqueline McCandless, Edgar Mitchell, Richard Moss, Thelma Moss, Kenneth Peltier, J.B. Rhine, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, James Rota, O. Carl Simonton, Harold Stone, Robert Swearingen, Charles T. Tart, William A. Tiller, and Jack Zimmerman. Many other people of academic, scientific, and medical standing discuss these subjects seriously and sympathetically, but the particular people that I've mentioned have come to my attention during the past 3 years. Most I know personally, and they are all, in my opinion, sincere, honest, and inspired by their investigations and experiences. Any human being who by now doesn't recognize mind over matter phenomena as valid parts of reality is living in the dark ages of unenlightened science. I feel no need to prove the existence of psi phenomena, either to myself or to other people. A facet of my interest instead is to develop psi abilities further, both in myself and in others, not as an ends in themselves, but as stepping stones into comprehensive awareness. How they work and why they work is less important than the direct experience itself. Actually, questions of how and why often impair the natural tendency to such experiences. I do not know that until one experiences it directly, either through another gifted human being or through personal experience, that which is termed psi is only a topic of conversation, frivolous, intellectual, or skeptical to most people in Western society. However secure the belief systems of the frivolous, the intellectual, and the skeptical may be, those people are self-condemned to a limited experience of life. I believe that human beings in general are currently undergoing a revolution of the most astonishing proportions in the area of human awareness. This expanded awareness will so fundamentally alter our perception of time and space, so drastically challenge most current scientific hypotheses concerning matter and its structure, that it must validate what all religions of the world claim: the existence of human consciousness in forms in addition to the human physical body. I base these statements on my own personal experiences. To me, confirmation or denial from other people or from their writings is less important than my own direct experience in these matters. To avoid misrepresenting my own abilities, let me state that I consider my experiences to be only in their initial stages of development. They are often sporadic, and they are usually available to me only when I am working with others, either during workshops or conferences or in some sort of psychotherapeutic interaction. I am quite sensitive to the emotional patterns present in other human beings, and I am at times aware of their future and past patterns too. While I can usually catch the overall trend, it is only rarely at this stage of my development that I can see how specific details about my future or someone else's past or future, or even someone else's current activities. I usually need to talk to a person only briefly before I begin to become aware of these things that have not been revealed in our conversation. I have had experiences of clairaudience and clairsentience, both remotely and locally, along with experiences in telepathic rapport. The majority of psi experiences have been in the field of the telekinesis of living tissue, that is, in healing. Remember, however, that I consider all psi phenomena as byproducts of the development of expanded states of consciousness, whether that development occurs through volition or by accident. Healing is just one of the several psi phenomena, and one must not be seduced into overemphasizing the importance of the ability to heal. When I direct energy through my hands, pain anywhere in the body is most easily and consistently relieved. whether the pain is of psychological or physiological origin, whether the body is mine or another's. Occasionally, masses have simply disappeared under my hands, and people often report that they feel as if my hands were physically inside them. In the field of clairvoyance rather than telekinesis, I am often aware what is wrong with the other person before my logical mind could possibly deduce the information from facts. It is important at this point to say that many times I have been wrong, and that other times nothing has happened when I have shared energy through my hands. Baffling as these incidents are, the positive experiences overwhelmingly influence me to continue into deeper explorations. As subjects for discussion, teachers and parapsychological phenomena belong together. Psi abilities are usually, if not invariably, learned from teachers of advanced, expanded, or natural states of consciousness, and a good part of the teacher's own learning comes from the parapsychological phenomena. Unfortunately, not all teachers are what they claim to be, or often all that they think they are. Many teachers simply parrot other teachers' work. Good teachers are rare. Excellent teachers of heightened consciousness are jewels. With care, it is possible to tell them apart. I distinguish excellent teachers by several criteria. They are, above all else, inspired. Their ideas and their beingness exalt and uplift anyone who may come into contact with them. They are invariably gifted in one or more of the parapsychological areas. Usually, but not always, they are aware of their destiny from an early age. Their ego structure is clear of major knots that would influence their teaching. They are eclectic in their approach to life. They see the underlying patterns in such areas as religion, social structure, life forms, and interpersonal relationships. They are visionaries who deeply sense an unfolding evolutionary trend in the human experience. They understand and have resolved the apparent paradoxes and contradictions between the individual and the group. They are able to transmit a perspective that shocks the conditioned mind into surrender to greater awareness. They are able to break their teaching into progressive steps, and they fully realize that statements made to one group of people may be diametrically opposed to statements appropriate to more advanced students. They have resolved the question of light and dark forces, of positive and negative action. They see everything, but they do not judge any kind of action or individual. Committed to a life of service to humankind, or even to a higher order of intelligence, they have little need or no need to live in personal relationships. They radiate a quality of love and understanding that words cannot express adequately. They are knowledgeable in both exoteric subjects and esoteric subjects. They have access in varying degrees to direct knowledge. They can tap information from levels of awareness other than the usual outer mind of memory, and they can bring this information through without distortion. This process is called channeling, and the teacher is the channel. There are three major channel methods. In one, the teacher enters a state of trance and appears to have an entity speaking through him or her. The key to this form of channeling is that the teacher is usually unaware of the process and later has no recollection of even the slightest detail of what was said or what action took place during the trance. The channel's voice may be considerably different from normal, as may be the cadence and other characteristics of the speech pattern. The channel may take on the movements and characteristics of the opposite sex, or may remain relatively motionless, his or her monotonous his or her voice monotonous and without inflection. The criterion of this kind of channeling is that the information is transmitted, that the information that is transmitted is usually foreign to the channel's outer ordinary mind. A good example of a person who used this kind of channeling is Edgar Cayce, who in trances often spoke on subjects that were quite outside the fields of interest and knowledge of his outer mind. In trances, he often saw people at distances and accurately described what they were wearing and the surroundings in which they were living. His diagnostic acumen was utilized by many orthodox medical practitioners. Time, either past or future, was no barrier to his trance consciousness. His abilities while in trance were mind-boggling, and yet he was not in trance. When he was not in trance, he suffered all the constraints of ordinary awareness. This point is important to note because it clearly shows that there are states of or levels of consciousness available to even the most gifted teacher when he or she is operating in the logical, conditioned outer mind portion of awareness. Pay attention to this aspect because you cannot always identify even a great teacher when what the ordinary person is in ordinary awareness. Make your decisions about a teacher when he or she is in heightened consciousness. Otherwise, you may entirely misjudge the individual and miss an experience beyond your ability to conceive. I have met a number of heightened teachers, and I have read the writings of many others, and they all display a great difference between their heightened awareness and their ordinary, common states of consciousness. I am speaking about such persons as Sri Satya Sai Baba, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, Ram Dass, Tarthang, Tulku, Baba Muktananda, Eunice Hurt, David Spangler, Franklin Merrill Wolfe, John Lilly, and Alan Watts, to name a few. Failure to understand this difference has been the source of much criticism directed at each of these teachers by ignorant people who expect them to fit into their own particular belief systems as to how a teacher, a saint, or avatar must behave 24 hours a day. Not one great teacher, now or in the past, has escaped the personality development phase of human awareness, and most of them have had to spend a large part of their lives in clearing out the clutter of their outer mind conditioning. Furthermore, no embodied teacher remains in expanded states for indefinite periods of time. Appreciate them when they are, and appreciate them when they're not. A second form of channeling is the heightened state, where the channel steps aside and allows another apparent entity to come through. In this form, the channel witnesses and hears the entire contents of the material, vocalized or written. Such channels have the sensation that something external to themselves is operating through them. They may not know the significance of the information brought through, but they are awake and aware, like a listener or an observer. I know personally 3 people who work primarily in this manner, and I have heard of others. One famous person, whom I did not know, but who was a prolific writer and an excellent example of this form of channeling, was the late Alice Bailey. The third form of channeling is more rare and, in my opinion, a more desirable method of channeling. In this form, the channels are fully awake, in fact, super awake. Ideas flow into their consciousness. There is no sensation of something else, something other than themselves talking through them. They are totally aware of what they're saying while they are speaking, though they may not remember the details when they finish. This kind of channeling requires highly integrated consciousness, because in it, the channel's conscious awareness must be heightened to the same level as that of the information that they are expressing. and experiencing. It may be of personal prejudice. It may be personal prejudice on my part, but I find that people who channel in this way are less compartmentalized in their daily lives than those of the other two channeling categories. Since many teachers use a combination of methods, the divisions of channeling are somewhat artificial and are useful only to learn to note differences in the methods of different teachers' use. The all-important point is that, regardless of the method of channeling, the information the teacher brings forth from these higher dimensions of consciousness comes from divine inspiration rather than notes, books, or any outside source. Teachers may use established models on which to reflect what they are saying, the Bible, the Kabbalah, the Vedas, but the essence of the material coming through is inspired, intuitive, and strikes deeply those who are exposed to their voices and their writings. There is a notable similarity in the basic teachings of great teachers, and I think it reflects the fact that they all enter a comparable state of consciousness and that their individuality determines only the discrepancies between them. As astute students know, true spiritual teachers speak a common non-language. Their presence, their voice vibrations, combine to produce this effect. Their words are the least of it. If you are seeking a higher teacher, let go of any concept that you may hold about what such a person would look like or act like or where they might be found. Many mediocre teachers take on the garb and mannerisms of the spiritual teacher stereotype. Their underlying dynamic is clear because they are usually insecure. They need external adornment to establish themselves, and thus they gratify undiscerning students who, in their strong desire to find the ideal teacher, end up with only their idea of the ideal rather than with a teacher who is truly great. The truly great have no need to play out a role to meet the needs of their disciples. Although I have stressed parapsychological abilities as attributes of teachers of consciousness, it is by no means to be construed that a teacher who can foretell the future or the past, or who can materialize or dematerialize, or who can heal incurable diseases is necessarily a great teacher. In fact, psi abilities can be traps for the naive mind, which immediately gives vast power to such a person, or makes assumptions far beyond what can reasonably be assumed about the individual who is gifted in these particular areas. It reminds me of the natives in uncivilized lands, uncivilized in quotes, who, on first encountering civilized people, see their guns, flashlights, tape recorders, and so on, and think that they are supernatural beings. It is well known in metaphysical circles that parapsychological gifts, no matter how impressive to untrained persons, are not the criteria of enlightened masters. Enlightened masters, if they use their gifts at all, are fully aware that these feats occur in the phenomenal reality structure and have no great significance in the area of awareness that transcends the physical material world. What matters is not the feats demonstrated, but the awareness of the teacher. In fact, if these abilities are all or most of what distinguishes the teacher from ordinary human beings, I suspect that the teacher is trapped in areas of power and control over people, so-called power trips and ego trips. Unfortunately, many people with superficial knowledge of metaphysical teachings can convincingly deny playing power or manipulation games while they continue to misuse these phenomena. Therefore, seekers, beware. It is your responsibility to discern your own teacher. There is a wonderful old saying that comes to mind. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. The student who is at the initial levels of training will meet the perfect teacher for him or her at that level. But here's another warning. Here another warning is timely. While the teacher may appear fathomless from the beginner's ordinary consciousness, no teacher ever can be. The mistaken belief may lead not to an expanded development of the soul, but rather to a narrowing. When the time comes for further development, the seeker must be willing to release from his or her current teacher, however valuable that teacher has been till then. An analogy out of my own experience, but not from the field of expanding consciousness, is the rich and varied training I received in orthodox medicine. I studied not at just one school, but at 3 well-recognized institutions. My medical school training at the University of Southern California was exceptional in clinical medicine, the part that teaches how to take care of the patient. At Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. Let me start the sentence again. All right. My medical school training at the University of Southern California was exceptional in clinical medicine, the part that teaches how to care for the patient. At St. Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, I learned academic precision, an additional facet that was highly polished. And at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, I learned balance. Since the 3 institutions in regard to a specific medical problem often had 3 different, fairly rigid approaches with diametrically opposed therapeutic concepts, it was an awakening for me to discover that all 3 achieved positive results. The same holds true for spiritual teachers. Round out your explorations into the barely charted realms of consciousness by experiencing many teachers, not just one. One last comment on teachers. Eunice Hurt, my own teacher, often said, before you give yourself to a teacher, watch to see which way the power is going. When the power is held by the teacher, when the teacher acts like a god or a saint or a special person and gives little or no instruction to bring the students into the areas from which the teacher is operating, when the teacher begins to seek personal accumulation of material aspects, either directly or by implication, when through empowering can take place through the sexual act, the teacher begins to suggest that the final empowering can only occur by going to bed with him or her, then the power is going to the teacher. When the teacher gives back all power you have delegated to him or her, when the teacher inspires you to your greatest potential, whether it is in your awareness or not, when a teacher loves you, all fellow human beings in all forms, without distinction, then the power is flowing to you. So far, I have been talking about outer human teachers. There are also inner teachers, phenomena that I sincerely hope all people will eventually encounter, as well as teachers in the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms. These I will discuss in another chapter along with my experience with Eunice Hurt, my second teacher, whom I will call my awakener of love made manifest. To complete the second chapter, certain concepts from the holographic model may be helpful. The hologram is a 3-dimensional image that appears in space through the action of light waves interacting with one another. The basic ideas are simple. To record an image holographically, a laser beam of coherent light is passed through a half-mirrored prism, which splits it into 2 identical beams at right angles to each other. Beam number 1, this is called the reference beam. then passes through a lens which widens it, and goes on to strike the holographic plate or film, without ever striking the object being holographed. Beam number 2, called the object beam, also goes through a lens and is widened, but when it goes on to strike the object, and the part of the light that strikes the object is reflected from the object to the holographic plate. As a reference beam and an object beam meet near the surface of the holographic plate, they interact to form a complex wave pattern, which is imprinted on the holographic film. Unlike ordinary photography, the patterns produced in the film are not of the object holographed, but are interference patterns of the two beams striking the surface together. Instead of a picture, the pattern appears in the form of geometric designs, but with the proper equipment, a laser beam projected through the completed holographic plate will form a three-dimensional image of the object in space, rather than a picture on a screen. In ordinary photography, a screen or some other object must stop the projected image and reflect it back to the viewer's eye, but in holography, no screen is necessary. Light waves interacting with each other produce the image that the eyes see in space. Theoretical psychology is currently considering the possibility that the appearance of objects in space may be a function of the two sides of the brain itself forming something like a holographic film, which cognition then organizes into images. With all our deepening understanding of the modality of vision, we do not understand how light entering the eye being transmitted back to the visual cortex is manipulated to make objects appear outside our heads. The holographic theory comes closest to a possible solution. Far more interesting to me, however, and germane to the paranormal and natural states of consciousness, is to consider the reaction of the holographic plate or film that records the image of light interference. In ordinary photography, if the negative is cut in half, one piece has half the recorded image and the other piece has the other half. If the negative is cut into quarters, each quarter has only a fourth of the image, and so on. If the negative were to be cut into 1,000,000 pieces, each segment would have 1,000,000th of the object. Not so with the holographic negative. If the negative is cut into 2 halves, each half contains the entire image pattern, and so can be reconstituted to form the whole image in space. If the holographic negative is cut into quarters, each quarter contains the entire image pattern. Theoretically, if a holographic negative were cut into 1,000,000 pieces, each portion would contain the whole of the original pattern, because the holographic plate or film is impregnated in such a way that every portion of the holographic negative sees in quotes, the entire wave pattern. So, we jump to a key insight. I believe it's possible that the human consciousness is somehow analogous to the holographic plate, and that each of us, representing a portion of this holographic negative, actually contains the total information of all consciousness, past, present, and future. The totality of this concept cannot be conceived three-dimensionally, but must involve at least four-dimensional levels to be appreciated. In essence, this hypothesis states that each of us is a part of a vast, totally aware state of consciousness, and that each has to access that total awareness, limited only by our ability to conceive of it and by the modifications of the physical apparatus of conception itself. This model can make understandable the ability of clairvoyance, to see an action occurring at a distance in the past, present, or future. The clairvoyants don't go to that point in space. That point in space exists in their own consciousness, and therefore all they do is observe the portion of their own consciousness that contains that section going on elsewhere. The same would be true of telepathy. If our own individual holographic negative contains the total awareness, we can have access to anybody's thought, past, present, or future. I believe this hypothesis is exactly true in all experiences, whether of the ordinary or superordinary kind. It is one way to explain how often several people will almost simultaneously create the same invention or have the same insight. It is consistent with both the mystical and the scientific statements that any action going on anywhere in the universe influences all points in the universe. Concepts of space are currently being completely restructured by theoretical physicists and science. Science now conceives that it is possible for an action at a distance to influence all points in space simultaneously, without any forces traveling through space. There are some really excellent publications on this concept. One that I particularly enjoy is called Space, Time, and Beyond by Bob Tobin, with technical assistance from physicists Jack Sarfati and Fred Wolf. I think the holographic model is an astonishing breakthrough in the comprehension of experiences in life. What fascinates me is the similarity between holographic images projected into space and the actual physical manifestations that one brings forth in space while in an altered state, such as instantaneous healing and so on. If you're interested, you may wish to investigate current work on the theory of holographic solids and developing theories to form solid objects in vacant space. For more information, I suggest Scientific American's exceptionally clear presentations on holography over the last 10 or 12 years. I believe that reaching higher or expanded or natural states of consciousness is merely the attuning of our central nervous system to perceive states that have always existed in us, but have been blocked by our outer mental conditioning and by our dwelling on the physical, emotional, and sexual aspects. The experiential awakening into expanded awareness is the hallmark of the Aquarian Age, now commencing. Just as human consciousness is now distinguished from animal consciousness, the higher states of consciousness will differentiate the human beings who experience them from the ones who do not, while this experience at present is confined to relatively few people. I believe that those few foreshadow the future, and that the quantum leap to higher consciousness will be experienced eventually by the entire human race. And that concludes Chapter 2. And Chapter 3 is entitled Energy, Experiments, Observers, Natural Teachers, and the Three Injunctions. Hope you enjoyed that. Till soon.